Horror Story: The Witch of Raven Hollow. It was the summer of 1997 in a quiet little town called Raven Hollow, deep in the forests of Maine. 4 best friends, Emily, Sarah, Jessica, and Lily, had grown up together, sharing secrets, sleepovers, and endless laughter. One warm July evening, they decided to explore the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse at the edge of town. Locals whispered about a witch who once lived there, a monstrous creature said to feast on the souls of young girls. But the girls laughed off the warnings. After all, they were just stories, right? The air around the farmhouse felt different, heavy, wrong. As they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them. The floor creaked with each step. The windows were covered in black grime, blocking the moonlight. Then, the chanting began. From the shadows, a figure emerged. A tall, emaciated woman with glowing red eyes, her face cracked like dry earth, and hair made of cobwebs. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing jagged, blackened teeth. It was her, the Witch of Raven Hollow. Jessica screamed, but it was too late. The witch lunged and grabbed her by the ankle, dragging her across the floor as the others watched, frozen in horror. Her nails ripped across Jessica's skin like blades. The witch slammed Jessica into the wall, bones cracking, and devoured her whole, her screams echoing in the rotting walls. Sarah tried to run, but the door wouldn't budge. The witch turned next to her. With a shriek that rattled the walls, she lifted Sarah into the air by her hair and smashed her head into the floor until her skull shattered like glass. The witch's jaw unhinged and swallowed her like a serpent. Emily and Lily ran upstairs, breathless, tears streaking their faces. But the witch was fast, unnaturally fast. She caught Emily on the staircase, pulling her back down step by step, her nails digging into Emily's spine. Lily watched in horror as Emily was dragged into the shadows, her last scream turning into a gurgling choke. Now only Lily remained. She hid in the attic, clutching a rusted iron rod she had found. The witch's footsteps grew louder, closer, then silence. Suddenly, the attic door burst open, and the witch charged. But Lily was ready. As the witch lunged, Lily drove the iron rod straight through her chest. The creature screamed in agony, black smoke pouring from her wound, but she wasn't dead yet. The attic shook as the witch grabbed Lily's neck. With her last ounce of strength, Lily kicked the witch into the old furnace and slammed the door shut. She lit a match and threw it in. The furnace roared to life, engulfing the witch in fire. Her screams echoed for minutes, until there was silence. When the firefighters arrived, they found only Lily, bloodied, burned, and traumatized. She never spoke again, but everyone in Raven Hollow knew the legend was true. 3 girls died that night. 1 survived. And the Witch of Raven Hollow, she's still waiting, in the ashes, for the next group of friends foolish enough to return. The Witch of Midnight Pines, a true American horror story. In the deep woods of Midnight Pines, an eerie silence always fell after sundown. The town of Black Ridge, nestled on the edge of those cursed woods, had long whispered about a witch, a creature of unimaginable evil, known as Agatha Crowbane. Her name was only spoken in hushed tones, especially during the fall, when the air turned cold and the shadows grew longer. 4 best friends, Emily, Sarah, Rachel, and Chloe, had grown up hearing the tales. Now in their 20s, they dismissed the stories as old superstition. That was their first mistake. It began on a chilly October night. The girls were having a sleepover at Emily's grandmother's old farmhouse near the edge of the forest. Laughing, joking, and sipping hot chocolate. None of them noticed the temperature suddenly drop. At precisely 3 a.m., a scratching sound echoed from the window. Emily went to check. A shadow darted past. Seconds later, the power went out. Screams filled the house as Emily was yanked by her hair across the floor by an unseen force. Her body was slammed repeatedly against the wall, bones cracking with each impact. The girls tried to help, but a horrifying figure emerged from the shadows. Long tangled black hair, burnt gray skin, and eyes that burned like fire. Agatha. With a spine-chilling howl, she devoured Emily alive, her blood splattering the walls. The next day, the police found no trace of Emily except claw marks scorched into the wood. The others were shaken, blaming trauma, but they dared not leave each other alone. They stayed at Sarah's house that night, hoping for safety in numbers. But at 3 a.m. sharp, Agatha returned. This time, Sarah was taken, dragged screaming through the hallway. Her nails broke off, trying to cling to the floor. The witch held her against the ceiling, snapping her spine, before feasting on her flesh like a ravenous beast. Rachel and Chloe watched in horror, frozen with fear. Rachel wanted to flee town, but Chloe insisted they couldn't run. Rachel didn't listen. That night, she stayed in a motel miles away, but evil knows no distance. At exactly 3 a.m., the room turned ice cold. The lights flickered. The television blared static. And then, silence. Agatha erupted from the bathroom mirror like a black shadow. Rachel barely screamed before she was seized and slammed through the glass. The mirror shattered, embedding shards in her body. The witch pulled her into the darkness, leaving behind only blood and silence. Now only Chloe remained. But Chloe was different. Her grandmother had been a hedge witch, one who knew the old ways. Chloe spent the entire day preparing salt lines, runes, binding circles. At midnight, she lit candles and waited alone. In the farmhouse where it had all begun, the clock struck 3 a.m. The windows burst open. The witch crawled in, backwards, her body disjointed, limbs twisting in impossible angles, mouth stretched wide with jagged teeth. She lunged. But this time, Chloe was ready. She flung enchanted salt in the witch's eyes, and Agatha screamed, steam hissing from her face. Chloe chanted a binding spell taught by her grandmother, and the ground trembled. The witch shrieked and tried to flee, but Chloe struck her with an iron poker, forcing her into the center of the circle. The witch burned, screeching, until her body erupted into black smoke and vanished. The curse was broken. Chloe survived, but barely. Her friends were gone. Her nights remained haunted by whispers and shadows that flickered just outside her vision. She left Blackridge, but the townsfolk still tell the tale of the brave girl who faced the witch of Midnight Pines and lived. Some say Agatha is gone forever. Others say she's only waiting for the next foolish group to laugh at the legends. And when the clock strikes 3 a.m., she'll return. The Witch of Raven Pines, a true and terrifying American horror story. In the northern part of Oregon, USA, lies an abandoned forest known as Raven Pines. For generations, locals have whispered about her terrifying tale. A woman accused of witchcraft, burned alive centuries ago. Her name was Agnes Crowley. Before she died, she swore revenge on every girl who laughed, sang, or dared to enjoy a night near her forest. They call her the Raven Witch. For years, it was nothing more than a legend, until 4 girls, Brianna, Taylor, Kayla, and Lindsay, decided to visit that very forest. They arrived, laughing and carefree, music playing in their car as they drove deep into the woods to stay at a remote cabin. For them, It was just a fun getaway. They had no idea that their laughter had awakened something ancient, something evil, something hungry. The first night, they sat around the campfire roasting marshmallows, telling stories, and taking selfies. Everything was perfect. Until exactly 3 a.m. The air turned freezing cold. The trees began to creak and groan, though no wind blew. Then came a scream, long, shrill, inhuman. A shadow, thick like fog, slithered into the cabin. Brianna was the first. It grabbed her by the mouth and hair, dragging her across the floor, out the door. Her body was slammed violently against the ground, again and again, until her spine snapped. Then, the witch began to feast on her flesh, blood soaking the earth. The others screamed but were too frozen with fear to move. When they stepped outside, there was nothing left but a puddle of blood and a burned, fleshy stench. The police were called the next morning, but found no real evidence. Just blood and claw marks. They blamed a wild animal. Taylor, Kayla, and Lindsay vowed to leave the forest, but they never got the chance. The next night at 3 a.m., the ground trembled again. Lights flickered, and deep scratches appeared across the wooden floor. The shadow returned. This time for Taylor. It pulled her from her bed, flung her against the cabin wall, and dragged her outside. She screamed until her voice cracked. Then, silence. The next morning, her body was never found. Only a torn piece of her shirt soaked in blood. Kayla and Lindsay panicked. They tried to escape, but the car wouldn't start. Their phones had lost all signal. It was as if the forest itself had trapped them. On the third night, Kayla was next. While she was in the bathroom, black handprints began to appear on the walls. A growl echoed from the ceiling. Suddenly, she was yanked through the wall. Yes, through it, and the entire cabin shook. Her screams came from inside the walls, as if something was smashing her body from the inside out. By the time Lindsay opened the door, all she saw was blood smeared across the tiles. Now, only Lindsay remained. But Lindsay wasn't helpless. She remembered the protective charms her grandmother had taught her. She drew a salt circle, marked Hurley symbols on the floor, and gripped a silver hunting knife passed down in her family. She sat in the center of the circle and waited. At 3 a.m., the door burst open. The shadow entered. This time, fully formed, the witch. Her face was rotten, split open with cracks, her eyes glowing like coals. She floated off the ground, her nails long and metallic, her hair a black storm of smoke. She lunged at Lindsay, but the moment she crossed the salt circle, her skin sizzled. Lindsay stood up, shouted her grandmother's protective chant, and drove the silver knife deep into the witch's chest. The witch shrieked like a dying animal. Her body burst into flames, flailing wildly, until it exploded into ash. By morning, Lindsay sat outside the cabin, soaked in blood, not hers, waiting for the police. The bodies of her 3 friends were found nearby, mutilated, unrecognizable. Lindsay told them everything. The witch, the deaths, the forest. Most didn't believe her, until investigators found ancient symbols burned into the trees, and on one tree, written in blood, "I am not dead, only sleeping. When the laughter returns, so shall I." Today, Raven Pines remains abandoned. Lindsay never went back. Some say the witch is truly gone, but Lindsay knows. At 3 a.m. one day, she will rise again. The Black-Eyed Witch of Shadow Creek. A true, terrifying American horror story. No chapters, just horror. In a small, remote town called Shadow Creek, surrounded by dense pine forests and ancient hills, There lived a fear that no one dared to name aloud, the fear of a witch with eyes like burning coal, known only in whispers as the Black-Eyed Witch. Locals believed she once roamed the woods, devouring young girls one by one under the light of the crescent moon. They said she was banished long ago, but only buried, not dead, and once awakened by laughter, she would hunt again. 4 close friends, Madison, Chloe, Aubrey, and Harper, decided to escape their college stress with a weekend getaway to an old, family-owned cabin deep in the Shadow Creek woods. They weren't superstitious. They thought the legends were just stories told to scare kids. They were wrong. The first night, after an evening of music, wine, and harmless gossip, the girls went to bed around midnight. At exactly 3 a.m., a scratching sound began at the window. Madison opened her eyes first. The room was freezing. Frost spread unnaturally across the glass. She whispered Chloe's name, but before anyone could react, something slammed the cabin door open. A black shadow moved across the floor. No footsteps, just sliding, like smoke that carried weight. The shadow grew into a tall, twisted figure. Her eyes were pits of darkness glowing faintly red. She reached for Madison, grabbed her by the throat, and dragged her across the wooden floor, screaming and clawing. The others were paralyzed. Madison was pulled outside, slammed onto the ground again and again until her screams became choking gasps. The witch bent over her broken body and began tearing her open, feasting like a wild animal. In the morning, all that was left was a trail of blood leading into the forest. Chloe, Aubrey, and Harper were too horrified to speak. They called the police, but by the time they arrived, the scene was empty. No blood, no signs of struggle. The cops chalked it up to a prank. The girls tried to leave, but their SUV wouldn't start. Their phones had no signal. The forest had claimed them. The second night, they tried not to sleep, but exhaustion took over. At 3 a.m., the witch returned. This time, it was Aubrey. She was ripped from her bed, thrown down the stairs, her bones snapping with each bounce. Chloe and Harper tried to stop it, but the witch turned her head, let out a sound like hundreds of insects crawling, and flung them back with a single wave of her hand. Aubrey was dragged across the porch, her head cracking against each step, until the witch opened her jaw unnaturally wide and bit through her throat, silencing her forever. Now it was just Harper and Chloe. Chloe had started to believe this was something ancient, something not of this world. She found symbols carved into the cabin walls, half-burned candles in the attic, and a journal that mentioned the Black-Eyed One. It warned never to speak her name or laugh in her woods. It was too late. The third night came. Harper didn't want to sleep at all, but it didn't matter. At 3 a.m., the cabin's walls began to shake. A dark mist seeped through the cracks, and a voice echoed, "Only one remains." Harper screamed and clutched Chloe, but she was yanked away by unseen hands. Her legs twisted the wrong way as she was pulled toward the fireplace. Her body was smashed into the stone, again and again. Her last breath left her lips in a whimper before her body was set ablaze by invisible fire and vanished into ash. Chloe stood in silence, alone now, broken, grieving, but determined. She locked herself in the attic, using salt she found in the basement, surrounding herself with ancient symbols from the journal. She read aloud a banishment ritual, cutting her palm with glass and marking a protection sigil on the floor with her blood. The wind howled outside. At 3 a.m., the witch burst in like a hurricane of shadows. She was angrier, more monstrous than before, her mouth filled with rows of teeth, her limbs bent and twitching. She tried to enter the circle, but burst into flames the moment she touched the line of salt. Chloe chanted louder, stabbing the blood-soaked dagger into the center of the sigil. The witch screamed, a sound that shattered the windows and echoed like dying children's cries, and then collapsed into a heap of black ash, hissing and twitching, until nothing was left but smoke. When morning came, Chloe was alive. Barely. She limped out of the cabin, bloodied and broken, but breathing. Police found 3 burnt marks shaped like bodies in the forest. The 4th, Chloe, they called insane. She never spoke again. She moved far away, changed her name, and lived alone, with no mirrors, no dark corners, and never any laughter. But locals say if you visit Shadow Creek on a crescent moon and laugh out loud, the black-eyed witch will rise again. And at 3 a.m., she will drag you across the ground, break your bones one by one, and feed on your fear. The Devil Witch of Black Hollow. A true, brutal, American horror story. In a forgotten corner of West Virginia, hidden between dead trees and endless silence, lies a cursed place known to the locals as Black Hollow. Few dare enter, and those who do, often don't come back. The legend says a woman named Lucinda Harrow was burned alive by her own village for practicing black magic over 100 years ago. But she didn't die screaming, she died smiling, vowing she'd return to rip apart every daughter of man who laughed in her woods. She became something worse than a ghost, a devil witch. 4 inseparable friends, Emily, Vanessa, Jade, and Claire, all in their early 20s, decided to go off-grid for a weekend. They found an old cabin on a hiking website with no reviews, cheap rent, and deep forest silence. To them, it sounded perfect. They laughed, partied, drank wine, took selfies, and ignored the feeling that something was watching them from the trees. They didn't know that Lucinda had already smelled their laughter and marked them. The first night, just after 3 a.m., a deep thump echoed from the roof, like something heavy landed above them. The lights dimmed. The fire went cold. Emily got up, thinking it was just wind. As soon as she stepped outside the door, she was dragged violently by her legs into the darkness by an invisible force. Her screams cut through the forest like knives. The others chased after her, but found nothing but a trail of blood, broken twigs, and deep claw marks in the dirt. In the morning, her body was found torn in half, hanging by her intestines from a tree, her face frozen in terror. Police were called, but the roads were washed out. No one came. The second night, silence returned, until 3 a.m. The door creaked open on its own. A shadow stepped into the cabin, blacker than the night itself, with glowing white eyes and twisted limbs that bent the wrong way. Vanessa screamed as the witch appeared before her. She tried to run, but Lucinda grabbed her by the hair, slammed her face against the wall, and flung her like a rag doll onto the cabin floor. Her skull cracked, and her blood spread across the wooden boards. The witch tore her open and devoured her slowly, hissing between every bite. Jade and Claire locked themselves in the cellar, shaking and sobbing, holding knives they didn't know how to use. The night passed. Morning came. Vanessa was gone. Only her voice echoed faintly from the trees, crying for help that would never come. The third night, Jade didn't speak. She just sat in a corner, rocking, eyes wide open. Claire tried to stay awake, tried to keep them safe, but the witch doesn't wait. At 3 a.m., the ground cracked beneath them. Black smoke poured out from under the floorboards. Jade stood, walked toward the front door like she was hypnotized, and opened it. Lucinda was waiting. She pulled Jade out by her throat, bashed her against a tree, and split her open like rotten fruit. Her guts spilled onto the dirt, her body twitching in the mud. Claire screamed until her voice vanished. Now Claire was the last one. But unlike the others, Claire had rage. She read the old symbols carved behind a mirror in the cabin. She pieced together old pages from a book she found buried in the fireplace. She created a circle of ash, salt, and blood. She dipped a knife in silver and whispered every Latin word written in trembling handwriting. 3 a.m. came. The witch screamed through the walls like a freight train of death. She erupted through the fireplace in a whirlwind of fire and rot. Lucinda stood before her, half human, half smoke, with jagged teeth and dripping claws. She lunged. Claire stabbed the silver knife into her own hand, spilling blood into the circle. The witch froze. Claire shouted the incantation and threw the blood toward her face. The witch caught fire, shrieking like 1,000 dying children. Her body began to collapse into itself, burning, melting, bones snapping in reverse. With one final scream, Lucinda exploded into black ash, sucked into the floor like dust into a vacuum. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Claire survived, covered in blood, alone, traumatized. She walked barefoot for miles until she found a road. When the police found her, she wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was just repeating. They laughed, and she came. Black Hollow was sealed off. The cabin was burned. No one goes near it now. But legend says if 4 girls go into the woods again, if they laugh, if they sing, if they dare, Lucinda will hear. She will rise again. And at 3 a.m., she will drag them screaming into the dirt, bash them against the ground until they break, and eat their hearts while they're still beating.